Populations are booming in the U.S. Southeast. Entrepreneurship, too. We'll talk about why on today's Builder Live. Hi there, I'm Chris Wink. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Technically, the news organization with a community of technologists and entrepreneurs. For 15 years, we have covered local entrepreneur and innovation ecosystems, largely in big East Coast cities. But we've always been fascinated with big mega regional trends. And one of the regions that has captivated my attention has been the booming U.S. Southeast. Population growing across the Carolinas, down to Florida, Georgia, glimmers of Louisiana, Tennessee, Georgia, and the like. Population's booming, so is entrepreneurship. So today we're going to talk a bit about entrepreneurship with leaders in a handful, 3, in fact, states in the Southeast. To join me, I have Lindsey Cox, LaunchTN CEO. She's their CEO. Lakshmi, Shenoy, the CEO of Embarc Collective. And Kwamena Aidoo, who's the partner, one of the founding partners at Corridor Ventures. Thanks for being here, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. And Kwam, because Lakshmi's coming from Tampa, you're from New Orleans. Lindsey's organization has the geography in her title. So can we start? Welcome us to your home market. Can you give us a little bit of local flair? What's the Tennessee, perhaps at the statewide level, or maybe Lindsey, because you have a big conference coming up soon, you could localize to Nashville. But could each of you give us a little bit? What is the entrepreneurial climate like in your home market, however you choose to splice it up? And Lindsey, I'll throw it to you first, and then I'll go to Kwam.
Yeah, Chris, I think you touched on it in your intro. The entrepreneurship climate is growing and is booming, not just in Nashville, but actually all across Tennessee. We are excited. You mentioned it, so I'll get to plug it here. We do have a conference coming up in 2 weeks called 3686. That is the latitude and longitude of Nashville, in case you were wondering why I'm saying random numbers to you. But it's a great time to come in and see really everything that's going on in Tennessee and from companies across Tennessee, but not even just Tennessee. And not even just the region. So, we last year had 38 states in attendance, funds from all over the nation coming in. And so great time to get that local flair of what's going on in Nashville and Tennessee broadly, but also meet with folks from really all over. And I would just say, what we're kind of best known for at Launch Tennessee, and I think that contributes to the climate that we've built here, is really that connected, collaborative nature of our state. So we have regional entrepreneur center partners all across the state of Tennessee. We have for 12 or 13 years now. And so we all get along. We're all friends. We're all swimming in the same direction. We're really leveraging each other to help companies get ahead in Tennessee, both from where you're located regionally, but then also within industry sectors. So in industries that are valuable to the state. So really trying to set that really strong foundation and baseline to ensure when a company comes to Tennessee or when a company is growing in Tennessee, we can help support them no matter where they are.
All right, noted. I'm going to come back on some of those distinctions, but let's go. Kwam, give me it. New Orleans, everyone's been there, but for the right reasons, you tell me.
Any reason to come to New Orleans is the right reason, but from the entrepreneurial perspective, I think what people are increasingly starting to see is that Southern hospitality played out in the business world and landscape, right? So there's a small but increasing and growing number of founders really just trying to solve global problems that we feel locally, right? So you'll see some founders working in clean tech. You'll see some founders working in biotech. You'll see a lot of founders working in food and bev and consumer. It's a very diverse founder landscape. But what allows it to continue growing as an ecosystem is, I think, the collaboration among stakeholders. And you'll see this in a few different cities across the Southeast. It's not just unique to New Orleans, but when you think about some of the tax and incentive policies being focused on small businesses and entrepreneurs versus only on corporates, right? When you think about the accelerator incubator landscape being collaborative as well, you start to build this funnel of taking people from the education system through idea development and generation to actually launching businesses. And the last piece that we're building in now is we're bringing more capital to the region.
Which is a common note. We'll definitely hit on that. Lakshmi, talk to me about Tampa.
Yeah. So the Tampa Bay region really encompasses Tampa, St. Petersburg, Clearwater, and Embarc Collective. We support entrepreneurs from across the state of Florida. One thing that we can talk about as we're thinking about what defines a region is what are the entities that are attracting specific types of talent to the region that may then impact the types of startups that eventually emerge from that region. So if you look at the Tampa Bay region, we have an incredible military and cyber presence, given that MacDill Air Force Base with Special Operations Command and Central Command and several large cyber players like ReliaQuest, all headquartered in this region. Environmental resiliency. Hey, it's Florida. We get hurricanes. So there is an acute awareness and a talent pool here that is really focused on how do we solve those problems, both from a governmental standpoint, a corporate or large entity standpoint, but also really in an exciting way, the startup landscape. Fintech, a lot of places have big fintech players. Florida is no different. And then healthcare and life sciences, people know that others will retire in Florida, even though the average age of Tampa is still mid-30s. But other parts of Florida are attracting people who are seeking more warmth in their life. They have healthcare needs, and that makes this an incredible place to start to build out new technologies to test for the senior population. So I think, I would agree with all of the statements that Lindsey and Kwam have made around how do you define it, but I just add that, like, who's working there, and what knowledge do they have, and how does that impact the problems that they're going to solve in the future?
I appreciate some of that nuance. Let's touch on that. But noting a couple of you cheerleading the Southeast in the comments, well done. Noting if you also have comments or questions for folks, feel free to plop them in, and I'll bring them in as they go live. Though the Southeast shout outs are also quite welcome. So it's been 15 years reporting, and one of the teas, actually, Kwam and I were on a panel a year or so ago, and he's heard this spiel from me that one of the pushes I've most often had is happily every region around the country is somewhere on its spectrum to engaging entrepreneurship or overall workforce change. It's a big old economic change, and everyone who's paying attention is doing something around this work. So some level is everywhere. And so I like to push, like, what is actually different about any given place or location. And Lakshmi, you hit on some themes, right? Like, a lot of it's who is working there, who is moving there, what inherent like infrastructure things are there, or industries already there. The Southeast, more generally, just one of its narratives is one of 2 or 3 regions in our country that has giant population boom. And on a whole, our country's not doing that. Lower fertility rates. It's mostly immigration that is really encouraging population gains. So I guess talk to me a little bit about how much is the entrepreneurial climate in the Southeast just growing because the big region's growing, and it's inevitable that there would be an entrepreneurship boom, versus is the entrepreneurial climate itself helping to bring and attract people? Can we talk a bit about what's causing what?
Yeah, I can kick us off there. I mean, I think Florida's a very diverse place with a lot of different populations, different points of view. But I think, from a Southeast perspective, what makes it really attractive from an economic standpoint is the lower tax basis. And so if you're trying to think about where am I going to build my business, it can be pretty attractive as a place to grow. We're also seeing, and I know that Kwam has experienced this in New Orleans, and I'm sure Lindsey has across Tennessee as well. But that boomerang population coming back to where you grew up, and so as the average age of entrepreneurs tends to be, not your college students, but people with decades plus of experience. As you're making that change, you might want to be closer to the people that are your support system, and that's going back to your home state. And so we're seeing a lot of migration back to Florida, which is exciting as well. And given how much the Tampa Bay region has grown, it's a new region for people who grew up there. It doesn't look the same as it did during the 80s. And for that reason, they're really excited to come back and put their mark on the place that they call home. So we've seen tremendous, obviously, over the past few years, we've seen tremendous growth, but it is really exciting that it has continued post-pandemic.
The pandemic theme we'll have to touch on for sure. We'll come to that.
Yeah, Chris, I would just add into Lakshmi's comments, and it was, briefly mentioned, just the lifestyle component that the Southeast offers, that Tennessee offers, that Florida offers. She referenced the lower tax base. That's certainly something that we see here with retirees moving in, or with people thinking about starting and growing their businesses and knowing that there are tax advantages to doing that in Tennessee. But I'd also throw in there, just innovation in traditional industries is really happening rapidly. And a lot of those traditional industries are in the Southeast, right? So we think about advanced manufacturing, particularly in the mobility space. Like that is really representative of the Southeast. In Tennessee, we have 4 kind of major auto manufacturers. Think about all the innovation that's occurred within vehicles in the last handful of years, right? That is going to attract more of those kind of folks into town, or into the state, I believe. So I think it's just that kind of combination of like lifestyle meets opportunity meets, we've all been working on our ground game for the last 10, 15 years. And I think we're really starting to see the fruits of that, right? Like we use a lot of agriculture metaphors in Tennessee. Like you don't start with corn, you start with seeds and gardening. And we have all been doing that seed and gardening work over, this didn't just start yesterday for us. This started many, many years ago. And so it's great to see the harvest coming, if you will.
Lindsey, we'll love it. Ground game, we're going to come back to. Kwam, wondering if you want to toss in anything on that.
I would just double down on many of the points Lindsey just mentioned, but said a different way. The entrepreneurial energy has always been here in the Southeast. Just hasn't always been the brand, right? Like, there's actually an article, I think in Forbes, a couple months ago that talked about the center of the U.S. GDP shifting to the Southeast. Like, that's not new. You have to think about all these old industries that have been here. In New Orleans in particular, a city built on a port, like one of the biggest waterways in America, like we've always been about commerce and entrepreneurship. When innovation is opening up and what the economic development ecosystem builders throughout the Southeast and particularly New Orleans are really focusing on now, which is where you're starting to see a shift, is how do we allow more people to play in this innovation space? How do we allow innovation to create more entrepreneurs? And I think that's the energy that you're feeling when it feels more recent.
All right, so let me do a thing. I'm going to try to throw a thread between the three of you, ending here, Kwam, with your point of the mix of both bringing in but also growing up what's home. Ground game, Lindsey, that hit home for me. Lakshmi, you talked about like you can't talk right now about entrepreneurship without acknowledging what happened during the pandemic. We had technically reported exhaustively, some might say. Sitting in 2019, the U.S. was the least entrepreneurial we had been in decades. We were on a decades-long decline, despite what you might have seen on Shark Tank or whatever. We were not going well. But I think, Lindsey, your point on ground game is something we've seen around the country. In the 2010s, so many of us were doing this work of like setting up entrepreneur support organizations or workforce, or there's a whole culture that came. Credit to the Valley. I think the Silicon Valley really does deserve some credit, where a lot of ideas were kind of dissipating out. And sitting in 2019, we did a bunch of reporting. Are we all dumb? Because it all looked in 2019 that a lot of effort was going while the march, we were starting fewer and fewer and fewer companies despite the narrative. And then the pandemic happened and like shook the whole system alive. And we saw a giant pandemic burst, disproportionately started businesses. When Black and Hispanic women disproportionately started them, but women overall had a huge system. And now 4 years later, we're still at elevated rates of business and corporations. Most of them are still non-employer entities, but we've seen a real revival in entrepreneurship. It's real, it's credible, it's happening, and it's particularly in big portions of population growth. But we're also seeing it in rural communities. One of the big stories, from a relative low base, we are seeing big rates of increase in entrepreneurship in kind of rural communities. So I guess the impossible question, but I'm kind of curious in your narrative, how much did the pandemic just like totally shake the system and we are now coming out of the rock bottom we had in 2019 in rates of entrepreneurship, versus how much are we just going to be in this, like, we had a few years where a lot of activity's up and you got to make hay while you can? Do you think we had a real paradigm shift during the pandemic, or is this a moment that we got to grab? Wondering where you guys think about the entrepreneurial climate we're in right now, generally, for each of your markets?
I think it's both, right? It is both a moment you can grab and leverage, but also it's not going away. The notion of entrepreneurship, the notion of startups, the notion of tech-based economic development versus more traditional economic development, that's here. We've been a big advocate of that for a long time, and I think the pandemic kind of blew the doors off of it, if you will. I think part of it is maybe, from that individual level of that life's too short mentality and the wake up call that the pandemic provided folks who maybe had an idea and were enthusiastic about something and then had the ability to work on it and then realized they could maybe move back to their home city or state because all of a sudden you could get access to capital, coastal capital from wherever in another part of the country. You didn't have to be in New York or San Francisco for that narrative to be true anymore. And so, I think there is a fundamental desire to start things. And I think, or to say, see an opportunity and it really be personally affecting you and, makes you want to start your company, whether that be a startup or more of a small business. When you're solving for a need that you're feeling, you solve for it in a very real way. And so, I think the pandemic was quite the provider of that. Now, do I think we'll see a dip and we'll see it kind of low off a little bit? Perhaps. But the notion of what the pandemic ushered in, which Chris, we talked about briefly at different points, this whole wave of federal interest, right? In regions and supporting the growth of technology-based economic development, that's not going away in the foreseeable future. And it has spurred, even if federal dollars eventually kind of dry up to do this specific work, it has spurred very real conversations, very real collaborations, very real initiatives that are going to keep seeding more and more and more of these founders in our region.
I think to add on to Lindsey's point, she had mentioned the startups, the small businesses. There's also this increasing population of 1099 contractors in the world, which I would categorize as individual entrepreneurs. There's that pandemic. I think Lindsey talked about it as sort of you only live once, and I would also say like it's choice. It's choose the type of life that you want, and so. Some people are choosing to return to office. Some people are realizing like location really matters to me and I'm going to figure out the lifestyle or the economic means to support my lifestyle. But all of this sort of the status quo got shook up because of the pandemic, and people are now deciding where they want to settle, back to their status quo or doing something in a different framing than what they did before. It might be the exact same skill set, but it might be with more flexibility, more choice in how they go about their day-to-day. And that's impacting that migration when somebody is prioritizing lifestyle, location, flexibility, and the Southeast sort of matches that criteria for themselves.
I just want to know, like, Lakshmi, you hit on some big macroeconomic trends that are like very real. And when you have enough interviews, nerdy interviews as I might with economists, you like start seeing some pretty foundational things shifting. Just when we've done a bunch of reporting on, third of Americans now are contributing income on freelance, or what we call sometimes side hustles. And it's blending and kind of shaping what we even mean by entrepreneurship, to be honest. Because there was, before the pandemic, as I know you guys will remember, there was kind of this line that we had. The evolution of economic development was, okay, sure, maybe we won't only chase corporate offices, maybe we won't only chase manufacturing, but this whole startup thing you kids are doing, you better at least go open an office, or maybe there'll be a co-working space and we'll make sure we go put folks there. That's shifted a bunch in the pandemic. A certain class of founders is remote and distributed. They're not all. We have good data that probably is not happening as much as we thought it might. We've seen a class of entrepreneurs, solopreneur, non-employer entities, which are most incorporated entities, but it's blurring as a kind of workforce extension. Suddenly that individual graphic designer who maybe would have been hired by a firm in 2019 might now only be taking contract work from a few different startups. So they're not showing up in some of the labor data as an employee of a startup, but it's kind of blurring or merging what we know about the labor stats in workforce. So that when you talk to economists, a thing has shifted, and we don't have a quite handle on what's going on there. And I'm kind of curious if you guys are seeing that in real time.
Can I just jump in? Because
Please.
one add to that is that we're seeing startups who are capitalizing on that desire to have that freelance talent in terms of their business model. So I think about companies in the Southeast like Visitree, Hipster, and Shiftoff. All three of them are completely building their operations on 1099 contractors to go global. And it is magic. I mean, in terms of the growth of these companies and the impact that they're making, but they're doing it without a traditional sort of full-time staff. And that is good for the startup. It's good for the 1099 contractors. It's good all around. And I'm starting to see that more and more in the startup space.
If I could do an entire other session on this, I'm going to hold myself back because there's a lot of great stuff here. But Lindsey, Kwam, just kind of also just wondering, have you guys were both active before pandemic. Have you seen like how your entrepreneurial ecosystems have kind of changed or shifted in a distinct way post pandemic?
I'll jump in real quick. I think oftentimes there are multiple factors at play when you see a shift or what's visible. And one of the things I think you'll see in New Orleans, Louisiana, and other regions is that there was a first at bat, if you will, investing in startups somewhere around 2010, right? There's actually an SSBCI one back in the day too that helped to fund some of that work. And those companies didn't start getting exits until 2018, 2019, right? So if you think about the capital base in the Southeast, a lot of it generated from old industry, a lot of it multi-generational. These are risk-averse wealth owners, right? They know how to make money in old industry. Some of them supported this program initially and just started seeing those returns on their investments in 2018, 2019. In New Orleans, we had Level Set, which might have raised less than 60 million, but sold for 500 million. We had Lucid. We had a bunch of these $500 million exits. Birmingham had like 6 unicorns. Miami is Florida and Tennessee. Like when you start seeing these things, this starts to actually reinvigorate money that's been sitting on the sidelines when it comes to venture and entrepreneurship. I think that's a big factor as well.
Yeah, I'll jump in just to echo that sentiment. I was seeing it kind of in that 2021, 2022 we referred to it as just tired capital that was like tired because it hadn't seen the return come back in from maybe that first boom of 13, 14, 15, where maybe folks thought things were going to be returning more quickly, or dollars were going to be returning more quickly than they were, and now they're starting to see dollars return. And Kwam, to your point, really reinvigorating and re-exciting the ecosystems. I'll also put in a plug for the SSBCI program. And so at Launch Tennessee, we are the stewards of the investment dollars that the state of Tennessee received for the equity side. And so we have a new fund, LaunchTN. We're actively writing checks to Tennessee located companies. 25K to 3 million is the range on those. And so you've got capital coming to the table now, fresh capital that is enthusiastically, making investments and getting more capital off the sidelines as a result of that. And so, I'm looking forward to the post boom of that and getting returns on the 70 million that we're investing in a few years. So we'll always have this evergreen capital stream for companies that are in Tennessee.
I'm going to lose these friends in a few minutes. I got a couple last questions. If any folks in the chat have any questions, feel free to throw them out, though. I've appreciated your many individual shout outs, and I'm pulling up some on the screen when I get a sec. So let's talk about what Southeast still has to do. One of the strengths of the United States, here I do like what works about our country really well is as such a giant country. We have very different regions, have very different strengths, and it's a value add. We just published a piece on tech talent, tech worker pipeline, and a pretty obvious thing shows up for a lot of older institutions still put out a lot of college grads. So the Southeast is still importing a lot of talent. That's why the relationship between population gain seems to relate so important. The Southeast has to kind of bring in some of its talent. Now that'll shift. We just published this chart of a piece that we had last week. Ooh, that's really hard to see. See if I can do that better. This will still be very difficult to see, but I'll just call out, just noting that we've seen some really fast gains. Dallas, Fort Worth, and Atlanta in the Southeast have had really rapid growth in computer science grads. But on the whole, San Francisco down, all those other regions are not creating anywhere near the amount of computer science or related workers to fill the openings they have. So mostly Northeast and coastal institutions are generating, and they're then having to go to the Southeast. So we're seeing some gains in some regions, and it's somewhat similar in entrepreneurship. I looked at some survey data on the importance of importing to the Southeast. So I guess I'm kind of curious. I love your earlier point, Lindsey, on ground game, the populations. Talk to me a bit about how the Southeast is a nascent corridor. It's grown really fast. It's got to bring in talent right now. But talk to me a bit about what is the ground game that you guys are now setting up now to have those homegrown entrepreneurs, the homegrown talent that'll help grow. Talk to me a bit about what is working there for 10 years from now.
Yeah, I'll just say, Vanderbilt has announced that they're going to have a new college focused on AI. I think it's their first new college in like 25 years or something. So you've got institutions that are taking this very seriously, UT in that mix, as well as that, combination of other, regional state schools, R1 that are still R1 or R2 institutions. So a lot of great research happening there. I think there is real opportunity around growing in that computer science, computer engineering space. But, as we're working on getting more ground game in that area, we're happy to take all that Northeast talent down here. Come on in. The water's great. Literally, we have beautiful lakes. So,
love that.
No apologies on picking up some of those computer science folks from up north.
Well said. Lakshmi, anything on the ground game? I love that phrase from Lindsey that I'm stuck on now. Either you guys in the ground game, the future seeds of talent?
Yeah, I'll jump in quick. Lakshmi go. I think some of the ground game is really just reversing narrative. Like in New Orleans, we've got 16 four-year higher ed institutions within a 3-hour drive of the city, right? Making us one of the biggest cities to attract talent. The issue for us is as much preventing brain drain as it is bringing talent in. Right. I think if you look at the Southeast as a whole, as a landscape, right, we do have some outperforming schools. When you think about overall talent, because tech now isn't just about the engineers, while it is heavily dependent on them, right? These sales forces, the marketing teams, et cetera, blah, 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 all these different people that make these large tech companies who they are. And you overlay that with, to Lindsey's point, the Vanderbilts, the UNCs, the Dukes, the Emory's that are here, all these outperforming engineering schools like Georgia Tech. Auburn puts out a ton of really great talent. LSU and even UNO, University of New Orleans, right, puts out a bunch of talent. What happens is all these people get up and go, right? Different places, they find different industries, they find different cities. And some of this ground game is really like getting some of these entrepreneurs stood up. So when these kids graduate, didn't mean that in the derogatory sense, but when these students graduate, right, the jobs are here, right? And they're staying, they're building this. And that would be another, I think, catalyst to seeing the region grow.
Yeah, I agree with Kwam in terms of how I frame the problem. It's less about making sure that the schools that I think about in Florida are going to be the University of Central Florida, University of South Florida, University of Florida, of course, and then Florida State University. They're churning out that talent. And what we've done this year is we did a pilot program of making sure that we were doing paid internships with students from University of South Florida to actually be in the startups in Florida, so that they understood what that pipeline for their career could look like, and that wasn't there before. So to Kwam's point about the brain drain, we want to make sure that we're making the opportunities front and center for the talent that we have here. That's much more of my focus than the way that you had positioned it, Chris.
And I got to move on to my final question, but just I lingered in you guys Three of you know me as a hammer nail guy. I'm obsessed with storytelling, and you talked about narrative, Kwam. Just touch on for me, how much is that, and how are you shaping the narrative of your respective markets? You know that I'm obsessed with this. Maybe Kwam, start with me there. Like, how do you shape the New Orleans narrative?
So me personally, and at Corridor Ventures, like we're an early stage venture capital fund that invests in pre-seed, seed, and A throughout the U.S. Southeast. Part of this is being better together. So like we spent the first 2 years of building our fund, just spending time in these different cities and regions. I've been to 3686. I've spent some time in Fort Lauderdale and other cities as well. And when you look at the Southeast in aggregate, there's so much that we do well, and there's even more that we do better together, right? Like we are partnered with Start & Co. with their mobility, urbanite mobility program in Memphis, right? Like, so there are these ecosystem development people that are already out here, and they're working very, very hard within their cities and their regions and their states. And I think part of this work is connecting those dots while amplifying the work that we see on the ground when we get out here and go meet people, meet founders, meet ecosystem builders. I think Evie Portman-Sanders is over here from GNO Inc. in New Orleans. Like they're doing a lot to catalyze Louisiana. And so part of it is being additive and helping the work. And the other part of it is letting people know what we're doing.
Mm-hmm. In the interest of time, I'll save you on that. Lindsey and Lakshmi, you know, I love stories. We'll get there, but I got to go. I went long. Close me with a positive note. So this is one of my other obsessions here. We all know we feel in a particularly partisan era and particularly partisan time. We have a big presidential election. One of the things that remains me 15 years in still obsessed and passionate about entrepreneurial ecosystems and workforce conversations is they are unusually bipartisan issues. You tend to be able to walk into any county, rural, urban, Republican, Democrat, and say, we got to talk about workforce pipeline. We got to talk about entrepreneurial access. And everyone tends to agree. So I wonder if you guys can send us off with kind of an inspirational note in any of your given ecosystems. Have you found, or can you share a story of where either entrepreneurship or workforce conversations kind of like brought coalitions together? Anything you feel good about? And send us out right. Send us out feeling good.
I'll end with a plug for a Launch Tennessee portfolio company, Whisper Aero, just recently featured in TechCrunch around a new partnership they have with NASA. They're headquartered out of Crossville, Tennessee. No, I did not say Nashville, did not say Memphis, said Crossville, Tennessee, a smaller rural community, but they also do have an office in Nashville. They are growing their business here in Tennessee with rural. They are doing amazing things in propulsion technology, in noise reduction technology, and have some really great partnerships. So I would just say companies like that exist in rural places. And so ensuring that folks know that.
Well done. Lakshmi, Kwam, what positive note can you send us off on that thread?
I'll jump onto Lindsey's plan of sharing really amazing company stories, because I think that's the storytelling, talking about the entrepreneur. They are what define a region, is their success. And the state of venture has been tough this year, and there is a company that's headquartered in Gainesville called Admiral, who's a member of Embarc Collective. They just raised a $19 million round. It's a big deal for Florida, big deal for the Southeast. And so there's activity happening. It's really exciting to see all of that come together in places that, other parts of the country may not realize that this type of activity is occurring.
Well done. Kwam?
And just to speak to your point more pointedly, we just had a transition in our governor's office from one party to another. And all of the laws, incentives that were put in place to incentivize entrepreneurship is stayed, right? It's still there. Some of them even boosted, right? The SSBCI program has had another leg, another win. And I think you see that in the policy, right? You see the policy showing that there's support, bipartisan support for investing in these ecosystems, because we all see this as a move forward. And if I were to give out a shout out to a company in my city, it's a company called Obatala Sciences. The founder is Dr. Trivia Frazier. She's a New Orleans native, Tulane grad, worked on some IP while she was in grad school, spun out and licensed it, and she's built an organ-on-a-chip product, biotech space, that's being used by pharma companies all over the country, right? And she bootstrapped this a long way before she raised her first dollar of capital. And so the last thing I would note is the challenges around raising capital has created a very capital efficient founder in the Southeast. And so when you're investing in this region, you're getting very high returns on your capital, even if they don't secure these billion-dollar exits. And you'll see a bit more about that from us at Corridor in the coming weeks.
Friends, I want to touch over. Thank you for letting me do that. I could talk far longer, but I won't. Let's thank Kwam, Lakshmi, and Lindsey. I so appreciate your time. As always, will inform next Builders newsletter that comes out Fridays and a Technically story beyond that. We'll see you next time. Thanks, friends. Bye, everybody.